Now from Eyewitness News, a special presentation. Eyewitness News presents Hidden History, honoring Black history.
Hello and welcome to a special Eyewitness News presentation, Hidden History. I'm Candace Kelly.
And I'm Nick Toma. February is Black History Month, when we celebrate and mark the contributions, sacrifices, and rich traditions of African Americans.
Now in the next hour, we will mark milestones here at home and around the nation as we look back at America's hidden history.
And we begin, though, in Lackawanna County and the story of African Americans who fought in the Civil War and called Waverly home.
Their story, once hidden history, is now told in a book called Embattled Freedom. Eyewitness News reporter Crystal Cranmore explains how the men went from freedom seekers to freedom fighters.
Nestled amongst the hills and valleys of Lackawanna County is this small community of Waverly Township. The town's beginnings can be traced back to the late 1700s as settlers from Connecticut made a life here. By the mid-19th century, this town had become a small-scale industrial center, proving profitable for farmers, dairymen, and iron workers. While economic freedom drew hundreds of settlers here, freedom from the horrors of slavery in the South also attracted waves of fugitives.
I'm a native of Waverly, PA, this lovely little town. I knew growing up a little bit about its history with the fugitive settlement here, but not much at all.
Jim Remsen is a retired journalist, historian, and author. He says while much has been written on Waverly as a village along the Underground Railroad, there was a piece of untold history until now.
I think a lot of people don't know there were black soldiers in the Civil War, and there were almost 200,000 black people in the Union Army.
And 13 of those black soldiers in the Union Army came right from the fugitive settlement in Waverly. 6 of them are pictured in this painting of the 22nd U.S. colored troops charging up the hill toward the Confederate defense lines in Petersburg, Virginia. The painting now displayed at the U.S. Military Academy's West Point Museum.
There were brief mentions of them in some of the town histories that I was seeing, but nothing except like a line.
So pulling old military documents, church records, and diaries, Remsen set out to fully unveil each of them in his book, Embattled Freedom. What attracted the former slaves and their descendants to this Lackawanna County town, and what turned them from freedom seekers to freedom fighters. Remsen's book highlights the abolitionist movement in Waverly that nurtured that sense of security. But animosity from white supremacists likely motivated the 13 brave men to return to the South, into the bowels of slavery.
So here's the grave of John Mason.
Several of those soldiers are buried at Hickory Grove Cemetery in Waverly. American flags acknowledge their sacrifice, but headstones like this one that reads 40 years in slavery, now safe in the hands of Jesus, paint a picture of a brutal past. Behind Waverly's United Methodist Church, we find the grave of George Keyes, one of the first blacks to settle here, according to Remsen. The pastor of this church married Keyes and his wife and accepted them as members in the all-white congregation. Keyes had a small plot of land at the edge of town where he was a farmer. He and his son, also named George, would go on to enlist in the 22nd Regiment of the United States Colored Troops in 1864.
They went to Virginia. Saw action there, bloody action there, and along the James River.
These documents indicate Keyes Sr. took a bullet to the hip during battle. While he was in battle frequently, members of the 25th Regiment of the U.S. Colored Troops were not, according to Remsen.
Here's Richard Lee himself.
A member of the 25th Regiment, Richard Lee injured his back while serving in Florida and later returned home to Waverly. Each of the 13 black soldiers playing a small but important role in American history.
Newspaper correspondents who were witnessing the battle, who wrote about the bravery of the black soldiers, which was a new thing here in the country, turning some attitudes around among the fellow white soldiers and the white public about the worth and the bravery of black soldiers.
Remsen's findings led him to some of the descendants of these soldiers, including Richard Lee. Yvonne Shrieks and her brother Mitchell Johnson have been on a trail to uncover their own hidden family history for years.
You don't really realize how much is out there until you put it all together, and then you realize that you have almost a complete story.
Items like Lee's service record and his pension request all bring this family a little closer to an ancestor who fought for their freedom. And with no individual pictures of Lee, Yvonne and Mitchell like to think one of these brave men of the 25th Regiment could be their great-great-grandfather.
It seemed like that, he was a freedom fighter. He wanted to go back and probably do right a wrong.
For Hidden History, I'm Crystal Cranmore.
We have information about the book Embattled Freedom on PAHomepage.com. Still ahead, mapping out history in the Poconos. A research project finds evidence of the Underground Railroad in East Stroudsburg.
And nestled in the endless mountains of Susquehanna County, the Dennis Farm, a historical gem rich with a history where free African Americans owned and worked the land more than 200 years ago. Those stories and more when Hidden History returns.
Tucked away in Susquehanna County is the Dennis Farm. Its story begins in the 1790s when the Dennis family, free African Americans, made their way to northeastern Pennsylvania. Their remarkable story continues to be told today through descendants who continue to operate the Dennis Farm. Eyewitness News reporter Eric Dable has more about the lessons and stories the farm holds for visitors.
Located on Creek Road just outside of Hot Bottom is a piece of northeastern Pennsylvania's hidden history. The 153-acre Dennis Farm has been here for more than 200 years, but many people are only starting to learn about it. Denise Dennis is now spreading the word after one of her ancestors, Prince Perkins, a free African American, settled here after coming from Connecticut in 1793.
They became landowners before Lincoln was born and were able to pass it down to each generation, which is something African Americans haven't been able to do as much.
Dennis's ancestors were farmers who planted crops and worked their own land. At a time when most other African Americans were slaves, her family was free. Dennis says Prince Perkins fit into a predominantly white community in part by becoming a fiddler.
And he played at all the major events. On voting day, at the house raising, that nothing got started until he came with his fiddle.
The farm that Perkins once lived on has been passed down for generations. There is still more than a mile of stone walls built by family members, and an old farmhouse which is in the process of being restored.
I feel so connected to them through that land that I can see where they lived, step on the ground where they stepped, see the fields that created crops that helped them to live.
One of the most significant features of this entire farm is located near the top of the property, about a mile off the established roads. This behind me is the Perkins Dennis Family Cemetery, where not only family members, but friends are buried. Those friends may have been African Americans who were looking for freedom on the Underground Railroad.
Runaways who died en route to freedom in our area were buried in our family cemetery because it was the only black cemetery.
In 2001, in an effort to preserve this property, the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust was created. Just 5 years ago, the group reached out to Keystone College to help tell the farm's story.
Over the past 5 years, we've had about 20 students be docents, and those are tour guides at the farm, and we educate them, and they actually have a better understanding of what the Dennis Farm is.
Lucas Taylor with Keystone College says the school also holds a symposium on the Dennis Farm each October. It's something students are interested to learn about.
They get to see a different piece of culture coming alive, something that they might have never experienced.
Tucked away in Susquehanna County is the Dennis Farm. Its story begins in the 1790s when the Dennis family, free African Americans, made their way to northeastern Pennsylvania. Their remarkable story continues to be told today through descendants who continue to operate the Dennis Farm. Eyewitness News reporter Eric Dable has more about the lessons and stories the farm holds for visitors.
Located on Creek Road just outside of Hot Bottom is a piece of northeastern Pennsylvania's hidden history. The 153-acre Dennis Farm has been here for more than 200 years, but many people are only starting to learn about it. Denise Dennis is now spreading the word after one of her ancestors, Prince Perkins, a free African American, settled here after coming from Connecticut in 1793.
They became landowners before Lincoln was born and were able to pass it down to each generation, which is something African Americans haven't been able to do as much.
Dennis's ancestors were farmers who planted crops and worked their own land. At a time when most other African Americans were slaves, her family was free. Dennis says Prince Perkins fit into a predominantly white community, in part by becoming a fiddler.
And he played at all the major events, on voting day, at the house raising, that nothing got started until he came with his fiddle.
The farm that Perkins once lived on has been passed down for generations. There is still more than a mile of stone walls built by family members, and an old farmhouse which is in the process of being restored.
I feel so connected to them through that land that I can see where they lived, step on the ground where they stepped, see the fields that created crops that helped them to live.
One of the most significant features of this entire farm is located near the top of the property, about a mile off the established roads. This behind me is the Perkins Dennis Family Cemetery, where not only family members, but friends are buried. Those friends may have been African Americans who were looking for freedom on the Underground Railroad.
Runaways who died en route to freedom in our area were buried in our family cemetery because it was the only black cemetery.
In 2001, in an effort to preserve this property, the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust was created. Just 5 years ago, the group reached out to Keystone College to help tell the farm's story.
Over the past 5 years, we've had about 20 students be docents, and those are tour guides at the farm, and we educate them, and they actually have a better understanding of what the Dennis Farm is.
Lucas Taylor with Keystone College says the school also holds a symposium on the Dennis Farm each October. It's something students are interested to learn about.
They get to see a different piece of culture coming alive, something that they might have never experienced in their life, and it's very close to the campus.
Descendants of the Dennis Farm are now trying to raise $10 million to restore the 19th century farmhouse as a museum and to build an interpretive center with a lecture hall. The Smithsonian has even taken interest in the farm, having taken roughly 30 letters, books, and documents to display. Now Denise Dennis wants to make sure all of northeastern Pennsylvania can learn about it too.
There is no site comparable to this that they know of so far in the United States that was owned by free African Americans for over 200 years ago, that remained in the stewardship of the same family, and is now open to the public.
In Brooklyn Township, I'm Eric Dable for Hidden History.
The Dennis Farm is raising money to build a museum and restore the farmhouse, and you can learn more about the farm and the restoration efforts by visiting pahomepage.com. Still to come.
Nobody questioned, should we do this? You know, it was when. Let's do it.
7 sisters on a mission to fight for freedom. We'll introduce you to the Lee sisters, from family discussions to pioneers in history. And then in central Pennsylvania, Bucknell University's African American roots run deep, with history dating back to the 1800s. And you can learn more about Black History Month on pahomepage.com under the Hidden History link. We'll be right back.
Did you know there's evidence that parts of the Underground Railroad existed in Stroudsburg?
A group is determined to uncover African American history in Monroe County. Already, they're learning more than expected.
The ultimate goal is to create a map and brochure to show families how the Underground Railroad actually operated in our region.
Eyewitness News reporter Brianna Strunk has our story.
The Underground Railroad was a network of secret routes runaway slaves used in the 19th century to escape into free states. And part of that system existed in Stroudsburg.
there was many routes through eastern Pennsylvania.
I really think we should involve someone with Little Bethel.
This group is determined to research African American history in Monroe County. Already, they're learning more than expected.
I think that this is extremely worthwhile to do.
Monroe County's Historical Association doesn't have many records about African American activity locally.
This is going to take a lot of work, a lot of digging through records, looking through books, and talking with the community members.
This is all landfill. This is Battery Park City.
Jacob Morris helped create this map showing Underground Railroad locations throughout New York City. His goal is to make a similar brochure for Monroe County.
We should learn from history.
Daniel Stroud, whose family founded Stroudsburg, created a school for African American students. Today, the building is a quaint house on Thomas Street.
That's very, very moving for me.
Dr. Sydenham Walton was a local abolitionist and Quaker who helped slaves escape to freedom. Today, he's buried in this small cemetery near Quaker Alley in Stroudsburg.
There is definitely information here, and we really need to get that out and help spread and share this history.
In Stroudsburg for Hidden History, I'm Brianna Strunk.
The group hopes college professors and independent scholars can help with research.
The Lee sisters from Memphis, Tennessee were pioneers of the civil rights movement. More than 50 years later, they remain proud of their title as the most arrested civil rights family in the United States. Rudy Williams reveals the hidden history behind this socially conscious family.
Nobody questioned, should we do this? You know, it was less when.
We spoke with Brenda Lee Turner, Peggy Jane Lee, and Elaine Lee Turner, 3 of the 7 Lee sisters. Together with sisters Sandra Lee Swift, Joan Lee Nelson, Ernestine Lee Henning, and the late Susan Lee, they were arrested 17 times between 1960 and 1966.
We grew up in an environment where there was a close family, and we talked about how things should be and were not, and that if we ever got a chance to make a difference, we would do that.
That chance came in 1960. The eldest sister, Ernestine Lee, led her sisters into the civil rights fight when she joined schoolmates from Lemoyne College during a sit-in at one of Memphis's white-only libraries.
I guess we were kind of groomed for them when we didn't know it.
With their parents' support, the Lee sisters would spend the next 6 years marching, picketing, and sitting in.
We had picketed so many times. I mean, picketing was just what we did all the time.
The Lee sisters have been lauded as pioneers of the civil rights movement in Memphis, honored with trophies from various organizations, including an historic marker aptly placed on Main Street in downtown Memphis, where they helped integrate lunch counters.
I had no fear during those times. The only thing that I thought they were going to do was arrest me, and that was no problem as far as I was concerned.
Reporting from Memphis, I'm Rudy Williams.
When we come back, Bucknell University is known for some amazing accomplishments and groundbreaking students. We'll trace the history of some notable graduates.
And making a joyful noise, the music that bounds a community together in faith, hope, and song.
Goodbye to my fears.
The civil rights movement took place in many parts of northeastern Pennsylvania, including in Union County on the campus of Bucknell University.
As Eyewitness News reporter Morgan Parrish explains now, the school has deep roots in our area's Black history.
Bucknell University is known for having one of the nation's top 5 most beautiful campuses, ranks 24th for best liberal arts schools, and for its ranked NCAA Division I athletics. But did you know it's also the home of many firsts in the African American community's history?
You'll see our history demonstrate that commitment in a variety of different ways. Black history on our campus has gone from being able to recognize the first Black student to do things to now being able to say that our students are very well acclimated to all of the parts of our campus.
The Iota Gamma chapter of Phi Beta Sigma became the first African American fraternity to step foot on Bucknell. Edward Brawley was the first African American to graduate from Bucknell in 1875.
Within 30 years of the institution's development, we have a Black man who graduated with a bachelor's and a master's who went on to do amazing things.
After recognizing the significance of Edward Brawley being the first African American graduate of the institution, this bust was built right here in his honor.
I think what is important about Brawley is that not only that he was the first African American, but that he graduated 2 years before Reconstruction.
An era that was especially difficult for blacks in the community.
Being the first also brings with it these perplexed questions of difference and isolation that we need to pay attention to.
Other milestones marked on campus was the graduation of the first African-American woman, Helen Evelyn Holmes, in 1924, to Henry Levis, the first African-American to join the basketball team in 1956, and later went on to become an engineer for NASA. One of the most memorable events was the 1956 campus visit by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Yes, that is exciting. And it's something that I think, again, really speaks to the history that Bucknell University has. To have a figure like Martin Luther King Jr. to speak on our campus really speaks to how Bucknell has been committed to having some of those challenging conversations.
An icon whose visit reverberates to this day.
That is phenomenal to know that he is one of many, amazing Black intellectuals who have been on campus.
We have an annual MLK celebration that takes place here on campus where we have a number of programs and events that happen. I am proud to be the director of the Women's Resource Center because I feel like the vision that Dr. King had and the vision that was supported by so many women of color has really been able to surface here.
But looking back isn't enough, as the university continues to prove its dedication to highlighting Black excellence.
As we look at Black history, I look at it as something that's right now being made.
In Lewisburg, Morgan Parrish, Hidden History.
Head to pahomepage.com to find a timeline of all the Black history at Bucknell University.
History was made this year in one local community in honoring the legacy of Dr. King, and Eyewitness News was part of it.
And in the 1970s, he unified a team. Herman Boone brings his motivational message to Central PA. Black History Month is not just about honoring those from our past. This year, a local community made history in its efforts to honor the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.
Eyewitness News reporter Crystal Cranmore takes a look at the struggle to close City Hall in Wilkes-Barre and the present-day leaders who helped make it happen.
Tickets to the very first Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. breakfast at Genetti Hotel in Wilkes-Barre were completely sold out. More than 300 people gathered to honor the life and legacy of Dr. King. But ask anyone here what makes this MLK Day more special than the past.
Wilkes-Barre City has finally closed its door in observance of MLK Day.
For years, big nearby cities like Hazleton, Williamsport, and Scranton have offered their city employees paid holiday time off in observance of Dr. King Day. So this victory in Wilkes-Barre, 30 years in the making, is something worth celebrating.
I had tears in my eyes when I heard it. I said it was about time, so this is a dream come true for me.
It's very important to recognize this day, especially in this climate of discord and racial divide. The amount of discrimination and racial tensions in our country has prompted us to do that.
But the fight to make the closure happen has been anything but easy. Former Wilkes-Barre NAACP President Ron Felton has been pushing for this for more than 20 years.
What are the differences between MLK Day and the other holidays? They're all national holidays. The city recognizes all of them with the exception of MLK. So what's the problem? So you can't help but start thinking, is this a racial issue?
But past Wilkes-Barre Mayor Tom Layton says it would have cost the city at least another $80,000 to add a 13th paid holiday to the books, a cost he says he could not justify. It boiled down to which of the other holidays union representatives would be willing to swap for MLK Day off. While it may have taken years to make it happen, activists say it was a triumph worth fighting for. Felton was honored for his role in this moment in history and advancing the legacy of Dr. King. But he gives some credit to Mayor Tony George.
I met with Larry and Ron on several occasions saying that one of my main priorities was to close City Hall for the day. It was a lot more difficult than I thought but we had it done.
Reverend Michael Brewster of Mount Zion Baptist Church and his congregation showed up in overwhelming numbers to city council meetings. And past presidents of the NAACP have also participated in the struggle to close City Hall. This ceremony was about honoring those who are blazing trails for the good in this community, both past, present, and future. Dozens of children in the audience witnessed history in the making, but some of them aren't just sitting on the sidelines.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up.
Young people like Max Leroy, a member of the NAACP Youth Council, are already having a positive impact on society. He touched the crowd with his delivery of King's I Have a Dream speech. The 8-year-old has big plans for the organization.
Trying to get everybody to come on the board and to show everybody how important this is.
And what a positive difference activism can make. It does not matter how old you are.
You have a voice, you have power.
For Hidden History, I'm Crystal Cranmore.
We should also mention our Crystal Cranmore was presented with a proclamation from the Pennsylvania State House for her work in the community and for her academic achievements.
Crystal was presented with the proclamation during the breakfast celebration. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy is one that is etched in history, of course. Those that knew him best and walked with him on that journey to justice and equality still tell his story and the story of everyone who marched during those trying times.
Reporter Tirsa Smith has more on the life of the Reverend Harold Middlebrook, who was a friend of Dr. King's.
I'm convinced that God has a plan for your life.
At age 75, the Reverend Dr. Harold Middlebrook's passion for civil rights still burns strong. As a young man, the civil rights movement was coming to a boil.
So when Martin King started in 54, and 55 and 56 with the Montgomery, we kept up with it every day in my household.
Reverend Middlebrook would go on to college at a prestigious school in Atlanta where his life would take a turn.
I graduated and went on to Morehouse. Did a summer program as a Woodrow Wilson student, got involved with Lonnie King, Herschel Sullivan, Julian Bond, and all of that crowd in Atlanta for the Committee on Appeal for Human Rights.
His friendship with Dr. King would land him in tense situations with local police.
They went out to the car and got a rubber hose and came back to proceed to whip me with the rubber hose. Now here's the difference. The tire iron can leave bruises and scars visible. The rubber hose leaves you wounded on the inside.
There, on the day that Dr. King was assassinated, Reverend Middlebrook reminds us all that the movement was bigger than one man.
The dream was not just Martin's dream. It was the dream of thousands of people who had suffered through segregation, humiliation, degradation.
He slowed down a bit, but is still pressing for change.
Reporting from Knoxville, Tennessee, I'm Tirsa Smith.
Reverend Middlebrook continues to tell the stories of his time with Reverend King and the movement to countless schools and community groups. We continue to celebrate Black History Month with great stories about unforgettable people who helped make our country what it is today. We'll remember the Titans with legendary coach Herman Boone, who recently brought the message of community unity to the campus of Penn College.
We are an organization that have secrets and no one knows our secret. That's what makes us serious.
And coming up, the intrigue and mystique of the Prince Hall Masons. The legendary football coach featured in the popular movie Remember the Titans made a special stop in our area last month. As reporter Kelly Choate shows us, Herman Boone continues to inspire generations of people from all walks of life.
Who are you? I'm Herman Boone. I'm the new assistant coach.
In 1971, Herman Boone was challenged with the daunting task of uniting black and white football players in Alexandria, Virginia. He led his team to a 13-0 record and went on to win the state championship. The motivational coach was portrayed by Denzel Washington in the movie Remember the Titans.
Reverse like your life depended upon it. Let's go.
Usually wherever I go, the whole front rows in the auditorium are filled with beautiful women, young ladies, because somebody put the word out that Denzel was coming.
The real Coach Boone was the featured speaker at Pennsylvania College of Technology's Dream Week in honor of Martin Luther King Jr.
These young men taught the world how to overcome your fear of diversity, and they taught us to accept the soul of an individual rather than reject any individual based on the color of their skin.
I think it's important, that they did bring him here, so all of these kids, so many different towns, races, ages, are able to hear and spread what he did.
Even though Hollywood embellished some of the events in the movie, the importance of this integrated team is very real. This story happened decades ago, but the concept of tolerance remains relevant today.
People communicating, getting to know one another, and breaking down those barriers, those stereotypes, those labels that are placed on each other.
Boone told the crowd that the future of race relations in America depends on our young people to stand up for what's right.
Is this as good as it's going to get? Will it ever get better?
And I hope to be alive today to see our country live out its true meaning of democracy for all people. When that day comes, I'll probably rise from my grave to say hallelujah.
In Williamsport, I'm Kelly Choate for Hidden History.
The Pennsylvania College of Technology also held a peace walk and day of service as part of its Dream Week to celebrate the contributions of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Still ahead on Hidden History, the history of the Masons is one of mystery and intrigue. There's also a branch of the Masons composed predominantly of African Americans who fought for and continue to fight for equality and community service. We'll take a closer look at the group when Hidden History returns.
As we continue our look at local African-American hidden history, one group's mystique has intrigued people for centuries, the Masons.
Did you know that there is an African-American Freemason organization whose history and practices are also shrouded in secrecy? Eyewitness News reporter Crystal Cranmore goes in search of answers.
Dressed in crisp black suits, velvet collars, and aprons with unique markings, these men are members of an organization some have considered a secret society for generations. It's a label they openly acknowledge.
We are an organization that have secrets and no one knows our secret. That's what makes us serious.
The members of Prince Hall Freemasons' Golden Rule Lodge number 15 in Wilkes-Barre can be considered silent movers and shakers.
We don't brag about what we do, we just do it. You know, Mount Zion Church, we did fundraisers for them. Bethel AME Church, we did fundraisers for them as well. NAACP, we have done fundraisers for them.
The organization helps communities, but still has a mystique that intrigues many. So where and how did Masonic organizations like Prince Hall begin? Freemasonry is one of the world's largest and oldest fraternities, dating back to at least the 17th century in Europe. It grew out of the Stonemasons Guild and evolved into a social organization. Records show the first Grand Lodge was created in London in 1717.
Today, Freemasonry exists around the world.
Amy Newell is the executive director of the Luzerne County Historical Society. Before that, she was a director at the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum in Massachusetts.
Freemasonry grew out of Enlightenment thinking. That's one sort of train of thought that contributed. Judeo-Christian traditions are part of it. Symbolism of tools and principles in actual stonemasonry is also part of it.
Like the aprons members wear. The first Grand Lodge in America was started in 1733 in Massachusetts. That's where we find the beginnings of Prince Hall Freemasonry. Little is known about Prince Hall, but the African American was a leader in the free black community in Boston during the American Revolutionary War period. Historians say Prince Hall tried to join the existing lodges in Massachusetts, but was turned away, likely because of the color of his skin. So he started his own.
So he wrote to the Grand Lodge of England and asked for a charter and was granted one.
And from there, it grew. Although they are a Masonic organization with roots to the traditional Freemason organization, Prince Hall Freemasons are a separate fraternity. Both share common ideals, service to community, and a shroud of secrecy. Newell says most fraternities saw a spike in membership after World War II.
Men come back from the war, they miss that camaraderie.
But Newell says culture cultural changes led to a drop in membership after the Vietnam War. But locally, the Prince Hall Lodge in Wilkes-Barre has seen membership grow in recent years.
Dated back as far back as 1889.
Membership documents show that this particular lodge has been around since the late 1800s. Larry Singleton is a past master of the organization and is now keeper of records.
It's some type of fundraiser.
Records that have withstood the test of time and survived Hurricane Agnes. The rise of Freemasonry among Black Prince Hall Freemasons centered around the church, education, and slavery. When slavery ended, the goal was to keep free men free through enlightenment. It's so much more than the closed-door rituals and secret handshakes.
And there's certain expectations that is expected of that you take on, and you take on yourself, that you're willing to make sacrifice for this brother, for this lodge, or for his family.
A brotherhood members hope lasts for generations to come. For Hidden History, I'm Crystal Cranmore.
Bringing people together in song, how the musical influence of early African Americans weaved right through northeastern Pennsylvania.
The story as our journey of African American influences continues next on Hidden History.
You're probably familiar with the term Gold Star Mothers. It recognizes the families of fallen service members.
The National Museum of African American History and Culture is working to preserve the stories of some families who paid the ultimate sacrifice. Our Eyewitness News Washington correspondent Bree Jackson tells us about these significant figures in history.
The National Museum of African American History and Culture tells America's story through the eyes of African Americans, like Medal of Honor recipient Cornelius Charlton. Charlton died serving our country, and his medal is now part of the museum's military exhibit, along with a photo of his parents, who joined a distinct group known as Gold Star families.
Mr. and Mrs. Van Charlton.
Curator Kowalski Salter says it started as a way to recognize mourning families.
Born out of World War I by mothers who had lost sons during the war. And it was actually born out of a desire to have something perhaps tangible to their loss.
World War I was one of the deadliest conflicts in U.S. history, and the bodies of many soldiers never returned home.
In death, they were not repatriated, most of them. Their bodies were buried in France.
In an effort to help console loved ones, in the early 1930s, the federal government sponsored trips for Gold Star families to visit the graveyards abroad. But that program came with controversy caused by racial segregation.
The black press and the NAACP and some of the mothers decided that they were going to boycott going to the pilgrimages because they felt that their sons had fought for democracy and equality, and yet 11 years later, when they were going on these pilgrimages, the pilgrimages were going to be segregated.
While some objected, more than 160 African-American Gold Star families did go to the grave sites to honor their fallen husbands and sons. At the time, segregation was the norm in society and in the military.
There is no justifiable reason for discrimination.
Then, in 1948, President Harry Truman signed an executive order integrating U.S. armed forces. And while the process of integration was gradual on the battlefield, military officials say it was immediate in the cemetery. Several African Americans who died during World War I are now buried here at Arlington National Cemetery, among other soldiers.
That is the American experience.
Salter says equality and inclusion are important parts of the Gold Star exhibit, which also honors Second Lieutenant Emily Perez and her family. Perez, who is African American and Hispanic, graduated West Point as the highest-ranking minority woman in school history. She became the first combat death from her graduating class and the first female West Point graduate to be killed in Iraq.
She was killed by an IED, improvised explosive device, while leading a convoy. And we use this story so people will know that today men and women are dying in combat, which is one of the reasons why we want to make sure that the gallery is inclusive.
Perez's parents donated her West Point saber and other artifacts to the museum as a way to preserve history. Salter says it's important to recognize not only the men and women who make the ultimate sacrifice, but the Gold Star families they leave behind. In Washington, Bree Jackson.
And you can learn more about Black History Month on PAHomepage.com under the Hidden History link. We'll be right back. Music is a big part of the African American experience, and that includes here in the Keystone State.
Several key figures in jazz history were either born in Pennsylvania or spent a big part of their creative lives here. And you don't have to go very far in NEPA to connect the dots.
To experience the rich history of African American music in northeastern and central Pennsylvania, you have to look no further than Scranton's Bethel AME Church.
If the music sounds good, the people come.
Bethel AME's music director Anthony Pauline says it's the job of the choir to draw people in, and soulful, beautiful music, if it's done right, never fails.
A lot of people come in, they're heavy burdened, there's depression, disappointments, all types of things going on when they come into the house of God. So the job of the choir or the praise and worship is to break through all that, to soften their heart.
Music is a big part of the African American experience, and that includes here in the Keystone State.
Several key figures in jazz history were either born in Pennsylvania or spent a big part of their creative lives here. And you don't have to go very far in NEPA to connect the dots.
To experience the rich history of African American music in northeastern and central Pennsylvania, you have to look no further than Scranton's Bethel AME Church.
If the music sounds good, the people come.
Bethel AME's music director Anthony Pauline says it's the job of the choir to draw people in, and soulful, beautiful music, if it's done right, never fails.
A lot of people come in, they're heavy burdened, there's depression, disappointments, all types of things going on when they come into the house of God. So the job of the choir or the praise and worship is to break through all that, to soften their heart.
And he's not the first music director of Bethel AME to believe in the power of gospel music. Singer John Legend once directed this church choir while a student at the University of Pennsylvania. He even signed the church organ after becoming a Grammy-winning singer-songwriter. But of course, the musical influences of African Americans in the Keystone State goes back much further than that. Jazz drumming legend Kenny Clark hails from Pittsburgh. And John Coltrane, who changed the course of jazz saxophone in the experimental 1960s, spent years working in Philadelphia, starting in his late teens. And the legendary jazz singer-songwriter Eleanor Fagan, better known as Billie Holiday, was born in Philadelphia. She had a seminal influence on jazz music and pop singing. Associate Professor of Music at Wilkes University, Dr. Philip Simon, takes it back even further when large migrations of African Americans came from the South to the Keystone State to look for work, and the music simply followed.
Dizzy Gillespie migrated to Philadelphia from the Carolinas, and he had a huge impact on the jazz scene in Philadelphia. Roy Eldridge, the trumpet player who taught Dizzy Gillespie, was born in Philadelphia. So there's, I think, a long history of jazz, African American jazz in particular, from both Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And I think that's part of the reason that we have that rich history in Pennsylvania, is because of the two large cities on either side of the state.
Pastor Darian Banks, who leads Bethel AME's Sunday sermon, says it's all about culture, community, and inspiring people to let the Spirit move you in a positive direction.
A person can come in and be feeling down and hear a certain song, and it brings them up, or it'll bring them back to a memory, a good memory.
We hope you learned something about the hidden history of the African American culture. Although we've highlighted just a few, there are still hundreds, even thousands more moments waiting to be discovered.
And you can learn more on PAHomepage.com under the Hidden History link. For Hidden History, I'm Candace Kelly.
And I'm Nick Toma. Thanks for joining us.